Chair, we're ready for you whenever you wish.
Okay, give me a minute. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Housing Authority meeting of April 11, 2017. May we have the roll call, please?
Authority members Devine.
Here.
Garpetian.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Razian.
Here.
Chair Sinanian.
Here. What's next on the agenda?
The agenda for the April 11, 2017 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Friday, April 7, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Very well. Approval of minutes. Do we have a motion?
I'll move the minutes.
Second.
Any objections? With no objections, the minutes are approved as submitted. Next item is oral communications. We do not seem to have any cards submitted to us.
Mr. Chair, there were no cards submitted for that portion.
So next item, please.
On the business agenda at 6A is a public hearing, Director of Community Development regarding approval of Section 8 Public Housing Agency Annual Plan Fiscal Year 17-18. 6A1 is a resolution adopting and authorizing the submission of the Public Housing Agency Annual Plan for Fiscal Year 2017-18 to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Before we go any further, I will have to recuse myself on this matter. The reason being that in a rental property that that I have an ownership interest in, we recently placed a Section 8 tenant, and this item would be approving the agency annual plan, which, as the city attorney implies, that the landlord is in agreement with the city, has a contractual relationship with the city. Therefore, that is the nature of the conflict. So I'll just step back and
thank you, Mr. Najarian. We still have a quorum, so who's going to present this item?
We'll ask the housing analyst, Veronica Velarde, to come forward and present to you some.
If you can open the hearing.
Open the hearing, please.
Let's open the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Good afternoon, Housing Authority Chairperson Sinanian, Housing Authority members, and city staff. My name is Veronica Velarde. I am a housing analyst in the Community Development Department. Today we're holding a public hearing for the Section 8 PHA Annual Plan for Fiscal Year 2017-2018. The Department of Housing and Urban Development requires each public housing agency submit a Section 8 Public Agency Annual Plan. The annual PHA plan informs HUD, residents, and the public of the agency's missions for serving the needs of low-income and very low-income families, as well as the agency's strategies for addressing those needs. Since our agency has been rated a high-performing agency by HUD, our agency is eligible to submit a streamlined plan. Now, part of the PHA submittal process is that we meet with the Resident Advisory Board to review the plan and obtain comments. Staff met with the board on February 22nd. Those comments will be submitted to HUD and are included as part of your staff report.
Who's that board composed of?
The Resident Advisory Board consists of about 72 current Section 8 families.
And how does this process work? You actually get them into a room, or
yes.
Do you individually meet with them?
We send a notice out and we meet with them. This year we met with them February 22nd. This year we had about 13 Resident Advisory Board members attend.
So out of 72, only 13 attend?
72, yeah. Typically, let's say if I get calls and people tell me that they can't make a certain date, we'll schedule a follow-up meeting, but it wasn't the case in this year.
Why do you think so few respond to? Do they know that they're part of an advisory board?
Yes, every 2 years we're required to select a new resident advisory board, and we send notices to each voucher holder. They self-nominate themselves. So I think the notice is sent about 3 weeks before the meeting.
And so let me go back to my question. So why do you think so few respond? Why do you think so few are interested?
I'm not sure. Housing Authority member Joe Kelly is part of that.
Yes, I think I can answer that, Mr. Chairman. I think that the reason we're having declining attendance for at least the last 3 years, it just seems to be about rent increases. And I think word has spread through the Glendale community that the Resident Advisory Board isn't there to field questions about rent increases. And so people are kind of giving up. They're kind of using the board to, kind of forward their own agendas. They'd like lower rent. It's for everything but that. The resident advisory board is for everything but rent increases.
So what is the resident advisory board for?
HUD requires that each public housing agency have a resident advisory board for the purpose of reviewing our PHA plan and also to obtain comments whenever an agency is making major changes to its admin plan.
And the reason I'm asking these questions, obviously, is because I want this process to be successful, and I'm reluctant to believe that reviewing the plan or coming up with comments for the plan does not include addressing issues like rents are increasing and therefore we need more help or something like that. I mean, something that's on point.
You put your finger right on it. I think that part of the problem with the issue is sometimes in larger programs like Section 8, there's a series of perfunctory steps, boxes to be checked off, and having the advisory board is in some ways doing that. Right. As Mr. Kelly points out, under the guidelines, they'll talk about everything but the biggest issue, the elephant in the room, being rents and rent increases. And so I think when folks, as Veronica indicates, every 2 years we have a new board come through, folks generally get excited when they first get engaged because they think that there's maybe something that's there for them that will change their life for the better in terms, or at least stop it from being changed for the worse. And understanding that this board, as required by the law, operated by the law, doesn't really do those things, I think interest begins to wane because it isn't a board that is ultimately going to get them where maybe they thought they were going to go by way of their participation. Is that a fair?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to add, the current board will be completing its second year at the end of this year, so we will have another recruitment later this year.
And I would venture a guess that the new board will be very excited, very engaged for that first year, and barring some significant changes, and who knows, we may be in for some significant changes with Section 8 based on the update that we got from the feds, Moises's optimism notwithstanding, that we generally will see the waning of the participation and interest as we wade further into their company.
So is that what you usually see, is that first meeting, everybody is there, and then it drops off?
Yeah,
Typically,
that's been going on since about 2009, Madam Mayor. 2009, we had 22, 23 members there. It's been consistently there until about this past year when we're down to like 13 members, which is, the impressive thing about this year's meeting was Deputy Director Peter Zobak himself came and fielded questions. What more could you want? Where else does the Deputy Director of a community, of a city, come to a resident advisory board meeting? Only Mr. Zobak that I know of, so.
So I'll continue.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So staff is recommending that the Housing Authority adopt a resolution authorizing the submission of the Section 8 Public Housing Agency Annual Plan for fiscal year 2017-2018 to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This concludes our presentation. I'm here to answer any other questions regarding the plan or the submittal process.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, please.
Comments or questions, and it concerns the augmented amount that the city makes toward payments. This has been going up consistently, rising, the amount of augmentation by our city to Section 8 rents.
Yes. Are you referring to the payment standard?
I am. The
Yes.
rent, yes.
Last year, the payment standard was increased twice, and it went into effect in April and October of last year.
And that's a reflection of the increasing rents, right?
That is based on the finalized 2016 fair market rates.
And I just wanted to point out, in Exhibit 5, I believe it is, right, you explained, and I think this is something that I think our residents need to know, those that are on Section 8, is the fact that as long as the owners give the housing authority and the tenants the proper notice, the housing authority cannot prevent rental increases given to Section 8 participants. So as long as you're given notice, the owners can keep increasing the rent. My question is, at what point do we stop augmenting? Is there a point, or does the owner just say, I can't afford to do this anymore? I'm not getting enough, I want to raise the rents more.
That's an excellent question. I think Housing Authority member Joe Kelly, that's a conversation that was asked and discussed at length at our resident advisory board. What happens when a tenant keeps getting multiple rental increases? That's a personal choice made by the family. They can either opt to pay the difference or notify their advisor that they're moving. I'd like to point out that the last payment standard that went into effect in October of 2016 goes into effect at different times. Out of all the voucher holders we have on the program, families come at different times for their annual recertification. So that payment standard goes into effect when the family comes in. So some of the families haven't yet received that new payment standard, so that will alleviate some of the rent burden that the family has.
But I also think that if you have those landlords who do not wish to participate in the program, then it becomes increasingly difficult for voucher holders to find a unit in the city, and thus, as we've seen, nearly, I think it's half or nearly half of the total vouchers in Glendale, half are portables. So conceivably, that differential may shift in another direction over time, depending on the level of affordability here in town. As Veronica points out, a family will either make the decision that they want to stay because the family is here, the schools are here, the way of life is here for their community and everything else, or they say, well, I just can't afford to do it. I'm going to Sylmar, or I'll go someplace else.
Right. But my question is, the city keeps raising the amount that we give them, don't we? According to this chart, we started to, the current payment that the city had let's take a one-bedroom, was $1,068, and now we've gone up to $1,175, and then maybe next year do we go up again? When do we draw the line? I mean, or do we? Or is it just dictated by whether
It kind of depends. To the extent, if we stop increasing the standard, I think you end up pushing more people out of the city. And if you keep increasing the standard but not have new funding come in from Washington, D.C., then you shrink the pool of overall numbers of voucher holders. And so the number of vouchers that we have in circulation will not be the maximum that we're allowed under law because we don't have the dollars to fund all of those vouchers, similar to what we saw prior to 2013 before we got an influx of new money. And so that dynamic is a little bit of a fluctuation, and it's something that...
like a balancing act.
That's right. It is a
Finding the balance
Balancing
between the two
act.
things. But I mean, frankly, the least I'm concerned with is how these landlords do. I mean, how do these folks that can't afford it do? I mean, how do we make sure a maximum number of them can actually make use of their Section 8 vouchers, at the same time securing securing enough landlords who are willing to actually rent out at these rates? And it's an ongoing battle. Yes.
Yeah, I think we talked about this issue before. I don't know if I got the answer, maybe I forgot, but you mentioned that they can pay the difference, but there is a limit as to how much they can pay. Am I correct? Let's say if the two-bedroom is $1,465 today, and they found a place is $2,000. Can they pay the rest and use their Section 8? What is the balance that they have to pay? What's the limit on that?
So each family, based on their income, is given a maximum rent to look for. And it depends on what the family's income is. So someone, let's say a working family who makes about $2,000 a month will qualify for more rent versus a family, a single person on a fixed income. So there is a cap that's based on a family's income, monthly income.
Okay, so they have to have a certain amount of income to qualify for Section 8, and then from there on, based on their income, they can pay the difference. But
Correct.
What is the maximum for a two-bedroom? What is the maximum income they can have in order to qualify for a Section 8 program?
As far as income?
Yes.
That really depends. It depends on the family's income. I just want to clarify. Are you asking a family's maximum rental income? Let's say this family A how much they can afford a two-bedroom, a maximum rent?
Yes, let's say a family has a voucher of $1,465 and wants to rent a two-bedroom unit, right? There are two bedrooms that are $2,000 these days, or $2,200, and the gap is like $600 between the two.
Right. So each family each family's income is calculated, and a maximum rental amount is given. There are many instances where a family does not qualify for a specific two-bedroom unit, so they have to go and find a specific unit that meets their rental needs. Okay. So there is a maximum. And that varies from family to family, and it depends how much income each family makes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to also point out that I stressed during the meeting how proactive our mayor and city council is about reducing rents. We had one gentleman in there that was very negative. He was coming to today's meeting. I was looking for him. He's not here, but he said, I'm going to come in, I'm going to talk to the mayor, he wanted to know how come I couldn't bring rent control in personally. So he's not here.
Do we have statistical information of how well the Section 8 program is operating in those cities that actually do have rent control? I mean, is it more successful? Is it working better? Are the units that landlords make available for Section 8 the ones that are subject to rent control? Are the rents going up less in those cities? Overall?
I don't. The information we have, I think, largely is anecdotal. We'll go back through some of the information that we brought back to council last summer, particularly in the Southern California market. The only problem that we may have is kind of the apples to apples. LA is so immense that I don't know if we can glean too much, but at least it'll be a data point that you can peg off of. But Peter, if we can try to pull that, extrapolate that from the information that we provided last year, we'll send that back to you.
We could. We'll look at that. Just a word of caution, though, you have to look at each individual for agencies that do have rent control, whether or not their rent control ordinance exempts Section 8 from rent control. So I would say that, or I would guess that those rent control cities that exempt Section 8, I would think a landlord would, when choosing between two types of tenants to rent to, would say, well, gee, there's no rent control cap on the Section 8 other than the federal restrictions and the regulations. Someone might look at that and say that might be a little more appealing to rent to that type of clientele.
But we don't know whether that's the case or not.
We don't know whether that's the case, but I'm sure that's one thing that all landlords in those agencies are looking. So you have to differentiate and take a look.
And does HUD adjust its sort of allowed amounts per voucher every year? I mean, how much do they allow for us to pay out every year? Or do they leave that up to us? Do they give us a bulk sum of money and say, you have so many vouchers, let's say yours are $1,500, this is the amount of money, work with it? Or do they say, no, you're allowed to, per voucher, you're maxed out at this much money?
Yeah. No, they say a lot more.
Oh,
they
so
really handcuff us in terms of how to operate the program. They say, here's your money. Here's your number of vouchers. This money might support $1,592. It might only support $1,400. Oh, and here's your rent for the LA metropolitan statistical area for a one-bedroom, two-bedroom, three-bedroom. You have some leeway to establish your payment standard up, below, or above that, but not much above or below. And then the other restrictions that come with the program, here's how much a tenant can pay no more than in their first year of rent. Then after the first year is over, then their portion can go higher to absorb increases that come on after, but up to a point where the tenant finally says, I'm paying more than, even with Section 8, I'm paying more than 60% of my rent towards my tenant portion only. And at that point, as Ms. Velarde said, they start to look elsewhere. So there's a lot of things that come into play.
Okay. And they view us, Glendale, as part of the LA metropolitan area?
Correct.
Although that could mean anything and everything, right? I mean, it's so large, there are all kinds of neighborhoods.
Well, the agencies in there are from Long Beach to LA County, and you can imagine their area of
so do they
operation.
on the Lancaster.
Yeah,
But then that's why they come back and say, and then they somewhat recognize it. They'll say, for the LA metropolitan area, here is the FMR for a one bedroom. You now have the ability to establish your payment standard as low as 90% of that FMR or as high as 110% of that FMR, depending upon what you locally feel you need to be able to operate a successful program.
And do you find those amounts to be at all realistic? I mean, are they really based on fact? Or?
Well, I would say that we've never gone up to 110% of the FMR simply because we've never had enough funding to support something like that. So it goes back to what you had said earlier. It's a matter of balancing. We could have increased our payment standards much more than what we did in the last 2 times of last year. But at that point, if the annual action plan report states that the actions that we took increased the program cost by about $900,000 annually. And so you have to take that into consideration when you start to try and forecast what is it that HUD will fund us next year. If they come back and if all these projections of a bad year for HUD-funded programs come true, any payment standard increase that you implement puts you further in the hole.
So the draft budget supposedly has a $6 billion cut to the HUD.
7% cut, a total of about $6 billion. The elimination of both CDBG and home. And depending upon who you talk to, either stable funding, and by stable meaning funding set at costs that are over a year old, which is already then a shortfall, or some type of reduced package.
For Section 8.
Correct.
So even if it's flat, it's effectively a cut because
exactly.
the market is increasing.
And if I can just go back to one item, because I sense that there might be some concern about the number of RAB members that turned out for the meeting, given the number that have expressed a desire to be in the meeting. I think some of that, though, is attributed not all to the negative, but to some positives. I think that there are a lot of RAB members that feel that the operations here are being well run, that we are truly a high-performing agency. And when they look at the reports and what it is that we publish and they see that we're increasing payment standards as opposed to some other agencies maybe decreasing payment standards, they see that things are running well. Some may look at that and say, I don't need to attend because all my concerns are taken care of. So there's 2 ways to look at that. And it felt like we were looking at it as a negative. I think more so it's a positive.
Yeah, even positive reinforcement would be nice. Even them coming forth and saying that.
But of those 13 members that did show, as Mr. Kelly stated, a number of them did say, you know what, you guys are, despite everything that we've talked about at that meeting, a lot of them then finished the meeting by saying, I'm telling you, it's a lot better than the housing authority I was in at LA or at the county. You answer your phones, your people are there when we stop in, I'm not ignored, I could be heard. We got a lot of that at that meeting as well.
That's actually in the report on page 2. One of the members said that Glendale is a great place to live and they don't want to move out. Other housing authorities do not offer the same quality of service as Glendale. So.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to underscore what Mr. Zovak just said. Almost everybody in there for the last 8 or 9 years has spoken first about gratitude about living in the city, has spoken about gratitude towards the staff, gratitude towards our city council. It was, I think it was me that kind of put a little bit of a negative light on it, but it was because of the question, why is there a declining attendance? And it kind of went that way. But there's tremendous gratitude in the room for the honor of living here in Glendale. Just wanted to point that out.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter.
Another question, maybe a question for staff or Mr. Ochoa. We talked about the modification to just cause eviction a few months ago. We've been working on it, and I believe there is a draft ready to send out to stakeholders and get everybody involved who's a stakeholder and get the community members involved and have the community meetings that was requested. I think this is the good time to start that process, if you will, and go from there. Hopefully, after the summertime, we can make a decision on the draft ordinance and make it a reality and see if we can make the modifications to the ordinance that we have today.
Yes, sir. I'm hopeful that the draft ordinance to those stakeholders will go out this week, maybe even tomorrow, and set those meetings for the early spring or late spring, early summer. and be back in time for you by the time the council reconvenes at the end of the summer to have those discussions for those action steps that you reference.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Parazian?
So I have a question. Maybe it will sound kind of strange. I wanted to know, does every city has RAP board? Does every city has a resident advisory board, Mr. Zovak?
Every agency that operates a Section 8 program, they're required to have a resident advisory board, yes.
Okay. And I'm asking, why can't we have the landlord's advisory board?
It's an interesting question, actually. We were talking about that with staff when we were looking at ways to promote the program amongst landlords, trying to get existing landlords to accept more units and new landlords that haven't in the past try to accept that. And we were wondering whether or not offering some type of representation at some level would maybe demonstrate the desire to want to hear what their concerns are too. But there is kind of a conflict, though, if it's being done in the realm of the Section 8 program. Okay. It's a tenant-based program for tenants. So we are looking at ways that we can try to involve landlords more, but I don't know if it's necessarily the involvement you would want where they are making or advising on decisions on the program. So we're going to continue to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No more questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, what's the action that's required on this?
Comments to close the hearing.
We'll close. We have no comments, and so we'll close the public hearing, and I guess we'll
Motion at
seek a
6A1.
motion
Someone needs to make a motion.
to move this item.
So moved.
Second?
May we have the roll call, please?
Authority members Devine,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Najarian, Parazian,
Yes.
Chair Sinanian.
Yes. Thank you. Next item.
Next item B is Director of Community Development regarding Measure H Revenue Planning Process Group update.
Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, it was asked that a verbal report or update be given on the status of the Measure 8 initiative, and I'm here to do that and take any questions you might have. The Measure H was a proposal placed on the ballot by the LA County Board of Supervisors and was passed by the voters last month. It will raise sales tax in LA County by 0.25% effective July 1st, and the revenues are designed to go exclusively to provide services and programming for the homeless of LA County. The tax will be in effect for 10 years, and it's expected to raise approximately $355 million annually. So over the 10-year period, about $3.6 billion, large pot of money. Because of the rush by the county to place the measure on the ballot and the unknown if it would pass or not by the voters, the county developed strategies for the measure and outlined it in the ballot, but what they did not do is they did not put together a specific funding plan for the measure. They're waiting to see if it would pass first. Once the item was approved, the county then unveiled a plan to fund what they developed as the 21 strategies to address homelessness in LA County, and that was the basis for the Measure H ballot. The funding plan calls for the formation of what they are calling a Measure H Revenue Planning Process Work Group, and that group is made up of 50 members, and they are made up of county department heads or their appointees, nonprofits, social service providers, and representatives of agencies representing local cities. I serve on that work group as an appointee of the San Fernando Valley Council of Governments, and that appointment came at the request of Councilman Najarian, who is a representative of Glendale to the San Fernando Valley COG. The plan calls for the group to review the strategies in depth over 4 meetings and then come up with what they're calling consensus funding recommendations for the 21 strategies that are organized into 19 funding buckets. Before the meeting, I placed at your chairs the 19 strategies, the 21 strategies placed into the 19 funding buckets and what it is that we'll be considering. These recommendations will then go forward to the Board of Supervisors for consideration on their June 13th meeting, just in time for the July 1st start of the sales tax. The meetings, we've had 2 meetings. It's 4 meetings total. We've had 2 meetings so far. Third meeting is scheduled for Thursday afternoon. They consist of focused presentations on each of the strategies and the funding proposals that will lead up to the final funding recommendation. The group's action will include final funding approvals for the fiscal year 17-18 activities, and then tentative reservations for fiscal years 18-19 and 19-20. At our first meeting, the lead county representative that is moderating the work group and their work went to great lengths to stress to the group that in order to be successful, the group was going to have to set aside their personal and organizational desires, needs, and self-interest, and to focus on the task of making funding recommendations relevant to the 21 approved strategies that were part of Measure H. No other strategies are allowed to be included or introduced, and no other actions are allowed to be considered by the work group. Each strategy is planned to be implemented by already identified lead agencies. Those lead agencies include the County Departments of Public Social Services, Health Services, Community Development Commission, Children and Family Services, the CEO Office, the Sheriff's Office, Public Defender's Office, Mental Health, and finally the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. Those lead agencies will then work to implement the programs and identify any local partners to fund consistent with their respective strategies. And this is where we feel that agencies such as Glendale and members of the San Fernando Valley COG might be able to benefit by in terms of who the lead agencies identify to partner with in implementing those strategies. But it remains to be seen exactly who, how much, so we'll have to wait for those lead agencies to come back. I should add that outside of this process of the working group, the cities of Long Beach, Pasadena, and Glendale have been lobbying the county on the need to direct allocate funding to the 3 cities and their respective continuum of cares. There are only 3 continuum of cares in LA County, those 3 cities. And so as a result of that, and given the amount of good work that the 3 continuums do, we are arguing to the County Board of Supervisors that there should be some direct allocation of funding to those 3 continuum of cares separate from the 21 strategies. And so we're working on that end as well. And I believe you have a copy of the most recent letter that has gone out to the LA County Board of Supervisors, signed by the 3 mayors of the 3 continuums. And with that, that's the update. Any questions? We do have representatives of the city's homeless services, Yvette Sambalian, and then also from Ascensia, Natalie Komora. They've both been present at those meetings as well. And I should say that the 50 members of the working group have been in attendance the last 2 meetings. It's been a full board, but there's also been an overwhelming response from members of the public interested in what is going on as well. So certainly over 100 attendees observing the meeting and then speaking under public comments.
Well, I know there was, if I may, there was some question when this ballot measure was presented as to how the money was going to be allocated, and we figured it was going to be a kind of a dogfight to get our fair share. And so I'm happy that you're representing us and the other representatives, Natalie and Yvette. Maybe I missed this, but did the lead agencies come up with these 19 suggestions?
21 strategies funded into the 19 buckets. Yes, they did.
They did.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So that 50-member committee came up with this 21 items, or
No, the county.
the county?
The county.
So let me
prior
ask you
to
this,
place-
because this was the concern before the elections, that cities like us, we were always concerned about not getting our fair share. And they said they have no plans in place because they don't know if it's going to pass or not. But right after it's passed, they have a 21-point, plan already, which is fine. But how do you see the forecast, basically? Are we going to get our fair share, in your opinion, or it's going to be a broken record again?
Well,
how are we trying to protect our rights to bring the money that we need to this city based on the programs that we, continuum care and extra programs that we have, as well as our share of the taxes.
It remains to be seen how much we will get. I don't think everyone is going to get what they feel is their fair share. So at this point, we're just at the table so that we could be represented and let them know. And keep in mind, their interest is, from what we're seeing, is how do your local programs then fit within our strategies? There might be an agency that is implementing a program, but if it's not similar to the strategy that's adopted, then your chances of maybe becoming a partner on down the line might be slim. So it's hard to say what the impact will be. We're certainly making sure that our voices are being heard, our concerns are being heard, and then where we can, we have some input in the process. Because as they say, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. Sure. And so we want to make sure that we're at the table. Some encouraging sign at the second meeting is that the group started to push back a little bit from this narrow field that the county had tried to place everyone in. So there was some appeals about some of the programs and about some of the agencies that provide those programs. Not much, but just enough to cause some concern. On a couple of the recommendations, for one, jail inreach. So at one point, the county representative had indicated that at this point, only LA County sheriffs are providing jail inreach. And it was made or stated to them that there are other agencies, local agencies, that have police departments that are implementing, that either have implemented or are going to implement some form of counseling and or inreach to their respective jail systems. So the county did concede and say, okay, we'd like to hear back as to which agencies are doing that so we can see whether or not it fits into our plan and then whether or not they are a subsequent funding partner under that strategy. So we do have something like that, and I reported back to the county and provided them the information. Burbank has a smaller version type of program as well, and we reported that back. So we're hoping that with every strategy discussion that's being held by the lead agency, that there's an ability to insert ourselves in there.
And that 50-member group, they're from different cities, or how many cities do they represent?
I would say that every county lead agency I listed is represented on that 50-member agency. There are a number of nonprofits and social service agencies represented. And then, as I said, a number of cities that are represented via organizations. So San Fernando Valley COG has one appointee. The San Gabriel Valley COG has 2 appointees. Harbor Cities, I believe, because of their size, has 3 appointees. So it's spread out.
But to the extent, I think it reflects the fact that homelessness is really more of a regional issue, and kind of reflects how the county has taken the lead. Ironically enough, this is probably one of the very few policy areas where those lead agencies actually have a vested interest in not completely absconding with every last bit of funding, because so goes the funding, so goes the service, so goes the service, so goes the target population to receive that service. I think the county has a vested interest in investing in different areas around the county such that one corner of the county doesn't get overwhelmed by a rather significant homeless population, which has happened in cities across the country from Honolulu to Miami. And so the county, I think, is going to look strategically at those agencies that offer, and those locales that offer programs that fit into their paradigm, and will help invest in them to keep them healthy, to keep them operating, and thus keep that population spread out in a way that is more egalitarian. It's probably more a function of looking at, we have our fair share of the service to provide, and the money is secondary to the service. Because if you have all of the money, you're going to get all of the service. It'll be a magnet for that population. I think the county's going to want to keep that as diffuse as possible.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything that Yvette or Natalie might want to add, or.
Hi, thank you. One of the things I think to keep in mind about this funding is it does tend to follow the organizations that are going to do the implementation. So if Glendale had no homeless service providers, you could argue for all the funding you want in Glendale, but you wouldn't get any because they need a mechanism to actually roll out the services. In a couple of areas that I wanted to just present to you that we're thinking about is one is expanding our outreach program. As a result of the cutbacks to CDBG over the years, we've diminished the hours of street outreach that we have in Glendale. If we were able to increase that outreach and then also in our border areas along Eagle Rock and down along the LA River where people are coming up into Glendale from those adjacent areas, that could be a real benefit to the city. The other is for year-round emergency housing for single adults. We need a site. This is something that would be really crucial for the city. We could apply for that, but if we didn't have a site, we can't make that happen. So this is an area where we would encourage you to be thinking about what would be feasible for a smaller scale, not 180 bed, but maybe like a 25 bed year-round program where we could really target chronically homeless adults and provide them the shelter. These are for people who will not get into the shelter that we have year-round at Ascensia. So those are two examples of funding. I also want to point out on the jail inreach, which is I think emblematic with some of these recommendations, is that the assumptions are a little off. So the idea that inreach is just a matter of, we're connecting new people in the jail system to homeless services. Well, the reality is a lot of homeless service providers have clients that get arrested. And then our challenge is keeping track of them and keeping tabs on them so we don't lose them as we're trying to get them enrolled into the services they need so that they can ultimately get housed and ideally not get arrested again. So we're really pleased to have Peter there representing the city and working on this commission and on this committee. It will be really important to continue to stay on task with it because there's a lot of moving parts and they're moving fairly quickly. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no more questions. Is this an actionable item? No. Just receive and file.
Need a motion for that?
No. Okay, not even that. Very well. Next item, please.
Next item is authority member and staff comments.
Authority comments? Yes, Mr. Carpenter.
Mr. Chair, I just want to congratulate my colleagues on their re-election win and looking forward to working with all of you in the upcoming years. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm kind of reluctant to say thank you before numbers are certified, but thank you. But
Then I'll hold off my congratulations, okay? Good enough.
But thank you, Mr. Carpenter. No comments. Staff, no comments. Maybe I'll make a comment. I think the next 4 years are shaping up to be eventful. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it's going to be tough. I don't expect anything good coming from Washington, D.C., and we're going to have some major challenges when it comes to housing. So brace yourselves. That's it. Those are my comments. We have no new business. Is that correct? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And we're adjourned at 4:20 p.m.